All right, so we do this every month except July, which is usually a travel month, and the holiday season in December is why we usually skip that. So once a month we convene here. We're here to support you in your reinvention journey. It's always nice to have people who are going through the same thing and learn from them. This is part two, and this is part two of a two-part series. I'm going to let Shannon Judge explain how this has been curated, because this has been her brainchild to have these two back to back. And our great guest, Nicole Lovejoy, who is an LCSW, licensed clinical social worker, who is well qualified for today. We're really talking about what it's like when you need support, when you're in the middle of reinvention, and how to get that. So I'm going to quickly turn time over to Shannon. Shannon, set us up on how you came up with this idea, got this curated for today, and then you and Nicole take off. Let's do it.
Thank you, Lynn, and welcome, Nicole. Thank you, everybody, for being here. This idea came about because we have touched a lot in our reinvention calls. As if you've been along this journey, you've noticed this, that there is a stark fact that sometimes during this process in which we need support, it's difficult to go through these life changes and make these big choices without support. In the process of getting the support, sometimes it doesn't come from our closest family, spouses, and friends. So we've mentioned this a lot, and I felt like it was sort of a blank spot that we just haven't dived into yet. So I thought, why don't we get an expert like Nicole, who is a profound therapist with a lot of deep insights into these types of issues, to really help us understand why this exists and where it comes from. And it's not, I think it's easy to feel like you're alone in not getting the support, but it actually is a very common phenomenon. So last time we dove in and talked about a couple reasons why, and different parts of us that get activated when we don't receive the support, and how the process of our own reinvention can sometimes act as a mirror to other people. So Nicole's going to talk a little bit about what we covered last time, set us up for this call today, and then today we'll dive into an actual pattern map, which is a skill of Nicole's that's really helpful that you can do for yourself as well, with Nicole ideally. And it helps us understand the process. We're going to give you a live demonstration, how it activates parts of ourselves, how we move through it and can heal it over time, and really how to become proactive and become empowered in dealing with this in our own lives. So Nicole, welcome. It's great to have you.
Thank you. It's so great to be back with everybody.
Excellent.
Excuse me. Yeah, I'm excited for part two and to dive into, last time we were together, we spoke about why loved ones sometimes fail to support us when we're reinventing. And really where we landed with that is it's not so much about them, but more about when we don't feel supported by the people closest to us, what that activates and gets triggered inside of us. And oftentimes what gets triggered when we're feeling unsupported is a fear of abandonment, feeling criticized, fear of disappointing others, fear of angering another person. And also sometimes it can activate feelings of, I'm afraid to outshine this person. And as we kind of talked and teased out a little bit of that, really the conversation led to, well, what do we do with all of this? And that led us to our part two, which is where we're at today. And last time we were together, I identified the 4 C's of what to do when we are getting activated and triggered. And these 4 C's are to get conscious and to really pay attention and about what is getting activated when one of our loved ones, when we're having an interaction or a conversation and we're feeling unsupported, to really get conscious. And then the second C is to get curious about what's getting triggered inside of me. How old am I feeling? Is this triggering a younger part of me? Is this triggering something inside of them? And when we stay open and curious, it's going to help us come from a place of love versus defensiveness. And so we'll be more receptive and able to have a little bit more grounded and connective conversation. The third C is coaching. And coaching is really being able to coach those parts that can become really critical of ourselves, that when we are feeling criticized by the outside world, that we can then start to internally criticize ourselves. And the critic, really, the internal critic that we all have, that when it's rooted in a place of fear, it can run amok and really do some damage to the psyche. And so when it's coming from a place of self-love, that internal critic really can turn into our internal coach. And then the fourth C is community. That really, we can't make these big changes in our lives without surrounding us with the people who are the torchbearers that have gone before us, and people who are our advocates and supportive of us. And really that when we have these different parts, right, we have the part of us that is feeling criticized and feeling unsure, and maybe fear of rejection if we make these big moves and we make these big changes. And then we have this part of us, which I call the wise part of us, that is really trying to emerge into this new reinvention. That when we have these two parts, we identify that it can create a split, or otherwise known as an internal conflict. And that when that internal conflict is there, that if the fear becomes too big, then it can shut us down and sabotage our success. It can create a lot of self-doubt and stop us dead in our tracks. And so there was a lot of conversation of, well, what do we do with all this? And so really, if you were sitting in my office and you were one of my therapy clients or coaching clients, I would take you through a process called pattern mapping. And this is really the first two C's of what I identified last time, the getting really curious and conscious of our patterns, of what's getting activated in us with our loved ones, because really that's where our power lies. We can't control the outside world. We can't control what our loved ones are thinking or feeling or saying or doing. But what we can control is how we take care of ourselves in that, how we respond. That's where our power lies. And so that's why I thought it would be really helpful to dive in and kind of show people how to do this for themselves, because there's something really powerful about being able to clearly see our patterns. And the patterns that I'm interested in teasing out when I'm working with a client are the patterns that are rooted in fear. And we all have these patterns, and these patterns, they consist of our thoughts, our feelings, and our behaviors. And we become habituated to these patterns. And these patterns are being driven by our beliefs. And unfortunately, these patterns are being driven not by our supportive beliefs that are helping us to reinvent, but they are oftentimes being driven by our, what I call our false negative beliefs that are rooted in usually shame of not enough. And so once we recognize all of that, then we can really start to take action steps on how to shift out of it. And so I thought it would be really helpful. And Shannon, it's so kind of you to offer to walk through this process with me. And you and I have done some work together and feel real. And so I'm just super excited to be able to go through this process with you. And Shannon and I have done a little bit of work ahead of time to kind of set the stage and set things up. And so that's where we're going to go today. Does anybody have any questions before Shannon and I dive into all that?
Just one question, and I think you've already kind of answered it, but maybe approach it from another angle. And Shannon Judge and Nicole, both of you chime in on this and answer this, okay? If we study social science, we know that the need to connect is more visceral than even food, water, shelter, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as you're talking about, let's bring connection in, social connection, maybe address how staying connected to self is just as important as having connection with people around us. Would either of you like to say anything to that? Because you're talking about pattern mapping and you're talking about self as well as others, right?
Yes. Yeah. So one of the things that I see, Lynn, is that when we abandon ourselves, and that's really, is that what you're speaking to, is when we abandon ourselves? Which is the fawning response. And we actually addressed that at our last reinvention call. And a fawning response is a survival mechanism that is hardwired into us. And we learn that if we are feeling unsafe in a situation, that if we keep the people around us happy, or we attune to what they are needing, that then it keeps us a little bit safer. And so in doing so, we disconnect from ourselves emotionally and we attune to the people around us. When we do that, we are unable to tap into our own internal wisdom, our own internal guidance system, and our own truth. And this can very much get activated in these situations where our loved ones are failing to support us. We can abandon ourselves and want to attune to them to make them happy as a survival strategy, because you are absolutely 100% correct, Lynn. We need each other to survive.
Okay, so this is real. Like some of you know, in the reinvention, you're thinking about how safe you are in doing this and how other people feel about it and how you need their support. And so I just wanted, I know we covered it, but I wanted you to reiterate that. Shannon Judge, do you want to add anything to it before you guys start?
Just a thought I had, Nicole and I had chatted before this call. One of the things that really struck me as being so true is that we learn by going through identifying our patterns, becoming conscious of them, working through healing them. We learn to find that support elsewhere within ourselves and with our chosen community, where we find this type of support that we need, that we may not be getting from those closest to us.
Thank you. Okay, I think we've set, I really wanted that in there because some people who weren't on last time may not have gotten as much of that foundation. Okay, take it away. I know this is going to be brilliant.
Yeah, and Lynn, that was a great setup, because we'll be able to show in Shannon's pattern map where that part of her gets activated. And we'll also be able to talk about how she has not abandoned herself and done so much work around this. Yes. Okay.
Okay.
So, and I'm old school. I use a whiteboard. I know there is currently technology out there where I could be doing this on my computer. I'm not there yet. So, these patterns, like I said, these patterns, they consist of a triggering event. It activates fear in our system. And then it's what we think, what we feel, and what we do in response to what we're thinking and feeling. And these patterns we become habituated to. These patterns are being driven by our beliefs. And the beliefs that are driving these patterns that I'm interested in teasing out with my clients are the beliefs that are rooted in some variation of not enough. And so what we're going to do with Shannon today is we are going to, she's identified a triggering event with a loved one. And we're going to zoom in to walk you guys through so you can see really how to tease out your own patterns. Okay, Shannon, are you ready?
Yes.
Okay. So Shannon, why don't you give like a little bit of backstory, and then we'll just dive right in. I'll guide you through the process.
Okay, thank you. So this event has happened numerous times with various family members, but I thought it would be good because I think it's relatable and a lot of us might be going through this. A little bit of backstory, my family, there's certain values, acceptable career paths. I didn't align with that ever really, so I took my own path, and that, largely hasn't been acceptable. So given that, whenever I went through reinvention, I've gone through reinvention a number of times with Lynn. A few years ago, I started to think, okay, what are the possibilities for what's next? I've grown through my current career. I had been in hospitality for many years, gone into wine. What was really next that aligned with my heart and soul? And coaching really was the answer that came up. I had had such a profound experience being a client of Lynn's, that I wanted to help other people in those ways. So during the pandemic, I embarked on coach training. Lynn has been my mentor, and I've grown and started my own practice and worked for SoulSalt and things like that. So in the midst of this, I've had interactions with family members about, what I'm doing and things like that. So that's sort of how this all came to be.
Great.
Is that
yes.
sufficient?
Yes. Okay. So what was the exact trigger for you that activated your pattern? Would you be willing to share that?
Yeah. So the trigger was sort of this, excuse me, me expressing that I've decided to pursue becoming a coach. seeing what that could look like, embarking on coach training. And the interaction with my close family member was, excuse me, dismissive. I felt judgmental, and the response was, well, it sounds like you really just don't want to work. Like you're giving up on life and you're in your 40s and it just sounds like you don't want to work. And that was triggering for me.
Okay. So what I'm gonna do is I'm literally gonna write out, I'm gonna identify the trigger and I'm gonna write that down. So you don't, and I'm just gonna condense it here, but if you're doing this at home, write out the full trigger. And a trigger is going to be what you hear and what you see, right? And so for you, it was this family member's words and maybe how they expressed it to you, the energy behind it that was triggering for you, right?
Mhm.
And so that's the trigger. You don't want to work. Okay, and then the first thing that gets activated in our system with these patterns, whether we're conscious of it or not, is fear, right? Some underlying fear. And so, Shannon, for you, what was your, when this person said this to you, what was your knee-jerk immediate response
Mhm.
hearing that?
I think I questioned it. I thought, what if he's right?
Okay, okay. What if he's right? So that was the very first thought that came up. And was there any feeling that came up with it?
The feeling, I felt judgment isn't really a feeling, but I felt judged. I felt criticized. I felt deeply hurt.
Okay,
Like I wasn't like, and it did trigger those I'm not enough kind of feelings
okay.
of
So
self-worth and things like
we're
that.
just, sorry, my light's kind of reflecting. So we're just slowly mapping it out, right? So the feeling, fear and hurt. What if he's right? You're going to map out the thought. And when you had that thought, then what was the immediate thing that happened? So what we're doing is we're taking this event and we're zooming in and we're slowing it way down.
Mm.
So then what happened?
So I think I felt defensive.
Yeah, yeah. And that's a really common response when we are getting activated, right? And when you felt defensive, what did you do with that?
I felt a lot of anxiety. I don't like to fight, but I felt like I needed to stand up for myself and over explain in a way
Okay, so
to disprove maybe this thing that was just said to me.
oh, I see. Okay, so you get really defensive. And so here's the thing, when we're hurt, one of our quickest ego defenses to feeling hurt is anger can be one of them, or defensiveness can be one of them. And so for you, did you feel any of that anger bubble up?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
For sure. And anger, oftentimes if we stay curious, we'll recognize that anger is really a go-to emotion, a secondary emotion, right? That if we breathe space into it and just kind of get curious, that underneath it is the hurt. And sometimes what will happen when we're triggered is we'll go from the trigger to the anger, but really the anger is covering up the hurt, the fear, the rejection, that sort of thing. And so, so we want to make sure and plug that in because it's the anger that leads to the defensiveness.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. Just writing this out.
Nicole, can I ask about that anger thing? So that defensiveness, is that us protecting ourselves?
Yeah, absolutely. Because here's the thing is when we're in anger, when we're in our fight energy, that allows us to take action. Versus if another response that can happen is we can feel so overwhelmed, but we're in a situation where we feel like we can't defend ourselves, we can't run away, we can't fight, and so we will literally just shut down and go into the freeze or the dissociated state.
Okay.
So Shannon, it was actually great that you were enough online that you could take care of yourself and that you and that's what your body was doing, was going into that protective energy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So anger and then defensive. And tell us a little bit about what that defensiveness looked like with this person.
I feel like it came out as trying to explain to like help this person understand. Because I felt like to say this thing that I felt like was inaccurate, even though I questioned it, I felt like, okay, well, I need to, clearly they don't understand what I'm doing, like that this is a legitimate profession that people do,
Mhm.
that I am doing something that I didn't just, think up over the weekend. It wasn't a whim. I've gone through a methodical process of coming to this, wow, this really could be a viable career path that really lights me up and that makes me happy.
Right.
So I think I over explain. I think I feel anxiety and try to reason in a way. Maybe I'm bargaining. Is that possible?
Yeah.
Almost like bargaining like for worth or something. I don't know.
Yeah. It sounds like what you're trying to do is convince him that it's okay, right?
Yeah.
Wanting him to see what you're seeing in this. And
Yes.
he's not going to. Right? You and I,
Yes.
we kind of, talked about how he has a different worldview. He has different values. He sees the world differently.
Yes.
And where you get hurt is wanting him to validate you and see that for you.
Which ultimately means I want him to be not who he is, right? Which I've come to realize is not fair.
Yes.
But it's kind of going to that place that we see in Reinvention of wanting the support and this person just not willing, capable, whatever, of giving it, right?
Right. And when we continue to go after that and it's not available to us, that's what creates suffering.
Yeah.
That's where we have a choice.
Yes.
Right. Okay. And so you get anxious, and then as you're in that anxious kind of bargaining state, what's going on internally for you?
I think the anger is still alive because I'm very frustrated and not making progress.
Mhm.
I feel like physically, I feel like elevated heart rate. I feel agitated, like, what's the word? I just feel, yeah, not good, not like myself. I don't feel calm. I don't feel peaceful. I don't want to fight, so I feel conflicted. Yeah.
Yeah. What is the feeling? I imagine in your state that maybe you're feeling unsupported. You're
Yes.
feeling, what would be some words that you would give to it?
I feel judged, unsupported. I feel like it's unfair. Um, I feel like I don't approach him in those ways about his worker career. So I
Mhm.
felt like there was a little bit of unfairness there, or
This is-
I guess that goes to the lack of support.
Mhm.
Even
Mhm.
if we don't align, even if it's not something this person would want to do with their life, at least I felt like there could be some sort of like, that's great for you that you found this thing, but it wasn't. It was sort of like you were a the vibe was, this whole like, oh great, you don't want to work, you're just a failure.
Okay. So
Shannon, can I ask, how about the sense of rejection? Your family is your first community, and here you've got this person who's kind of one of the leaders in the family. To me, it feels like he's rejecting you.
That's a great point, Hillary. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that wasn't a new feeling because I've taken a different path my whole life, my whole adult life. But yes, absolutely.
yeah,
Rejection.
and I'm going to plug that in right up here because Hillary, you're absolutely correct that that's kind of at the crux of this. It's feeling rejection and ultimately abandoned, right?
Yes.
And so you can see that we're just mapping it out. We're just writing it all out. Okay, and so when we feel judged, unsupported, this is unfair, that can feel really overwhelming. And I'm wondering, what did you do at that point, Shannon? What happened
In the
internally?
moment, immediately I did shut down because I realized to keep pushing creates arguing.
Mhm.
And I didn't want that to happen. And, there are kids around and it's not productive. And so I just sort of tucked it away
Yeah,
and just looked at the clock and thought, when can I get out of here?
right. So shut down. And typically after we shut down, we withdraw, right? And then when we're shut down and withdraw, oftentimes we're now ruminating and we're stuck in
Yes.
our head. And that can also activate feelings. So as you're shut down and withdraw, looking at the clock, feeling like I just want to leave, but feeling like you can't. What's going on internally for you?
For me, tears come up, so I'm trying not to cry.
Deep breaths, you're doing so. Yeah. Try not to
Yeah,
cry in the moment with your family, right? Taking some
yeah.
breaths, yeah.
So trying to find diversions and other things to bide the time. And then I think that rumination thing that you touched on is really big. After the fact, after I leave, um, I didn't really think about that, but I ruminate a lot.
Yeah.
And I do need, I often do need like someone like you to, and you have been a person that I've reached out to and called to set up a session when I go, encounter something like this that knocks me off my center.
Mhm.
Because sometimes I really do have trouble pulling myself. I'm getting better at that, but I can't, there are times still that I can't pull myself out of that.
Okay, and so
You know,
when we are
energetically.
having, yeah, and I think it's so important that you are identifying this, because when we have a hard time pulling ourselves out of something and we get stuck in our head, oftentimes it can, we're in a feeling state of feeling hopeless,
Yeah.
right? Despair, hopelessness, all of that. And
Okay.
and I know that for you, because you and I have talked about this, that can sometimes be a piece of this for you.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a piece of it for all of us. So here's the thing, Shannon, that I want to say is like this pattern right here is a pattern that I too am familiar with.
Okay.
Right. And this pattern I would identify as an abandonment pattern.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then when we're sitting in all this, typically what we do with this, who wants to be in this? Right. So when we're in this is when we are reaching to numb. We're reaching for the glass of wine. We're reaching to scroll on social media. We're reaching for the bag of potato chips, for the vape pen, shopping, gambling, binging Netflix, sex, right? All the many ways that we numb and check out. But the problem is this is still all going on underneath the surface, right? And so oftentimes what happens is we become disconnected and now we're just living up here. Sorry.
Living in the feeling hopeless.
Trigger,
Uh-huh.
and the ways that we numb, right?
Yeah. So
But,
true.
and so it's important to, and that's why I think that this work right here is so important, is to really recognize and zoom in and see what's going on. So you can be conscious and aware. Because here's the thing is we can't control the family member. We can't control that piece. But the piece that we do have control over is this. All of this. I'm curious, Shannon, when you're in this, what are you believing about yourself?
I go through a cycle of, I think when I ruminate I almost feel like maybe there are parts of me that are checking off reasons why he could be right.
And what does that mean about you if he's right?
That I could be a failure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And
And
so,
not enough.
and not enough, right?
So it's interesting to me how raw Shannon still is with this. Just talking about it right now, her brother's not here, but just talking about it, she is to this level of emotion again. It's a big deal.
Yeah. And here's the thing, Hillary, is I haven't worked with somebody yet who doesn't have this going on internally underneath the surface that's getting triggered. And you can see how when we are really trying to emerge and move forward and reinvent, if this is the undercurrent of what's going on, how that can really sabotage our success.
Yes.
Right. And I'm curious, who here, I'm going back to gallery view, who here relates to this? Who here has experienced some version of this? Yeah, Shannon, thank you for
Yeah.
being so brave to map out all of our pattern. Right? It's like, this is the stuff that we are all dealing with. Let me ask you this, Shannon, in that moment with your family member, what were you needing?
Love, support, acceptance,
Yes.
but
So
someone like believing in me.
yes.
There's more that I'd like I love excitement and things like that, but even just the basic, like, good for you. Like,
Yeah.
you're gonna do great.
So when you're mapping it out, that's what goes in the middle.
Okay.
And here's the deal. It is not seeking that out from the family member, but it's recognizing this is what I'm needing to heal this. And how do I give myself love, support, acceptance to start healing this? And I'm also curious, Shannon, when you're in this, like take this family member out of the equation and just look at the pattern itself and kind of feel into it. And tell me, when is the first time you remember feeling this way? Another way of asking this is, how old do you feel in your body when you're in this? Connect into how old this little one is that's getting activated.
I feel like it's my whole life in
Mhm.
various different scenarios. Feeling it probably like 7.
Yeah.
And it's recurred in different ways, like throughout. Yeah. From
Yeah.
different with different people, not always the same person.
Yes,
It's a
absolutely.
family belief system that I just don't really subscribe to.
Yeah. So you can see what happens is these little ones get triggered, and then it's no longer the adult consciousness that's in the driver's seat. It's the child consciousness that's in the driver's seat. And we literally, it's kind of like a trauma response. So time collapses between today, present moment, and we're kind of back physiologically, right? Emotionally, we're kind of back in that state.
Yeah.
And so if, you know, and the work that that I would do with the client is like, now let's do the trauma work around the 7-year-old, right?
Okay.
Let's heal this so we can really start to shift this. Right. Okay. And so I'm going to I want to write something out, because what's getting triggered, we've identified that the wounded child is getting activated, right? In these patterns, what I've witnessed in all the years that I've been doing this is that it's the wounded child that's getting triggered oftentimes. Or, okay. So, and then we have our adult self. We all have these different aspects of ourself, right? We have our adult consciousness. Our adult consciousness has all of our years of experience, right? Then we have the wise part of us. The wise part of us is that part of us that is connected to our higher power, whatever that is for you, to our internal wisdom, our intuition, right? Then we also have the critic that lives inside of us. And we've talked about the critic and how that voice can be relentless, and it can be projected inwards, and it can also be projected outwards. When the critic is rooted in love, it becomes the coach. We also all have the saboteur. I'm writing this out for you guys. And the saboteur is that part of us that can get overwhelmed and fearful and scared of change, because our mind likes what's familiar, right? Our mind likes what we know, and our mind's job is to keep us safe and comfortable. But when it's rooted in love, it's the lighthouse, and it will illuminate the way forward, right? And then we all have the inner child, and that's the part of us that is playful and creative and joyful and fun. And then we all have the wounded child. And so we can see that with this pattern map, that the comment made by the family member, it activated the wounded child. It also activated the critic, and the saboteur is who stepped in to take care of the wounded child. Can you guys see that?
What do you mean take care of?
Okay. Maybe not take care of. So here's why I'm gonna change that. What I want you to do is I want you to recognize that when the wounded child is present, that we do need to take care of it. But the critic and the saboteur are not going to do a great job of taking care of the wounded child, right? And so what we get to do is bring in the adult, the wise part of us, the coach, and the lighthouse to take care of the wounded child. These are all different aspects of ourselves. And so last time we were together, when I was talking about there being a split or a conflict, it's like this part of you, and then these parts of you that are not quite yet conscious, that are rooted in fear, are in conflict. And as we do the inner work and the trauma work, which we all have, it helps to integrate this so we can really stay grounded in the coach, the lighthouse, the inner child, the wise part of us, and the adults.
I feel like this came up last time, but I'm almost wondering if it might be worth another call, a third call to go into the proactive. What do we do with this even more proactive, right? Like, how do we start this healing, continue this healing on our own, become our own, like really lean into our wise adult? How do we move into this empowered state? I don't
Yeah.
know. Just a
Yeah,
question.
absolutely. And I would be so happy to do that. And here's what I'll say. Shannon, you will never go down this the same.
What do you mean? Oh, after mapping it out?
Yeah, you will know when you're in
Yeah.
this, right? There is something powerful about seeing it written out in front of you in red and purple, in our case, right? That you'll go, I know what's happening here.
Yes.
I know there's a 7-year-old inside of me that is feeling rejected, afraid of being abandoned, feeling hurt.
Mhm.
You will know. You will have awareness. And then you can take a deep breath, right? And figure out, what can I give myself? How can I help myself in this moment? Right? And
Yeah.
then, getting into pattern maps. How can I start to interrupt the pattern, right? How can I do some trauma work to heal the wounded child? There's all kinds of things, but it starts here. It starts with being able to get conscious and curious. What is going on? Right?
Yeah.
Where we're unconscious, we're living in the trigger's gone, the trigger and the numbing. We're just kind of living up here. But really, all this is going on. And so you can see how, as you're reinventing, all this stuff is going to get triggered left and right. You have to see what's going on so you can really step into what's emerging from you.
Mhm.
Okay.
And building your personal team. I think that's such a great part of reinvention as we start to learn how to put together our personal support team, whoever it is. It could be our coach, it can be our therapist, it could be a colleague, it could be anyone trusted that believes and supports you. That's a pretty
Yeah.
powerful thing to have during reinvention.
That's a good one. And so let's let this ruminate, because next month, which is September, we already have our topic, and Shannon Judge or Shannon D can tell us about the topic.
Oh, great.
Shannon Judge, if you want to plan for October, we could talk about self-authorship. We could talk about, when do you determine you need therapist versus a coach when you're reinventing, because that's something we've talked about on our coaching roundtable. So anybody on this call, if you're interested, we do a monthly roundtable where we meet as coaches and discuss skills. And that's one that we've already covered, but we have not covered it on this webinar. When do I need a coach? When do I need a therapist while I'm going through reinvention? And what can each of them offer me might be helpful, because I know a lot of you on the call have therapists as well as a reinvention coach. And so sometimes you need a little bit of both. So Shannon Judge, think about that, curate that. You bring Nicole back on. That would be our October topic.
Great. I
Yeah.
love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Shannon,
Oh, can I ask you about the numbing? Because I've done this pattern mapping with Nicole, and it was a big awakening, I will tell you that. But it's life-changing. So I'm so grateful. When you talked about the numbing, you taught me about maladaptive behavior in the pattern mapping. What is the difference between numbing and maladaptive behavior, or are they the same?
It's the same in this way. Our numbing comes from a maladaptive pattern, right? We can see that this pattern of Shannon's, it's maladaptive in that she is strategically trying to keep herself safe and connected to her family, right? And by shutting down, being quiet, and then so that's the maladaptive. It's adaptive to this stress response. And this maladaptation started when she was 7 years old. So it's these maladaptive patterns. And then as we enter into adulthood, like having all that inside of us, we numb, right? Really, how the bare bones of this, I learned of pattern mapping, the bare bones, I learned in addiction and recovery, right? Because somebody would have a relapse and they would come in and we would be addressing, right, just the numbing piece. But But when we get curious, right? So there was the trigger for them. And we would go like the trigger and we would go straight here. Well, it's like, no, that's not what caused the relapse. This caused the relapse. Right? And we all have addictive behaviors. Right? We all want to find ways to feel better. That's normal. Until they start harming us, until they start sabotaging our success, until they stop us dead in our tracks when we're wanting to reinvent. Did that answer your question, Hillary?
Yeah.
So now what? Shannon Judge and Nicole, this was very, very useful to watch.
I'm so glad.
I'd love to contribute that. I think once, like Nicole said, once we become aware of what's going on and if there is something deeper, because it's so human to want to escape it and to not dive in. But when we do it even once, the awareness that it creates really gives us the power to change it next time. And every time it keeps shifting. It like moves the needle. And Nicole, you pointed this out to me, it lessens our reactivity.
Yeah.
And which is really empowering. So I think that's a huge piece.
I think we falsely have the goal of like, I want to just get rid of this pattern.
Yeah.
And here's the thing, it's like, well, it's a part of your story. There's a little 7-year-old that experienced all this, but we can definitely learn how to carry it differently so we're not as reactive.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So we can come at it from a place of self-love. Yeah.
And learn how to give ourselves the things that we might not be getting from this other person or community, right? Or family.
It's a tool you'll use forever. It doesn't go away.
Yeah.
You just default to that instead of that pattern
Mm-hmm.
that you created early on.
Yeah. You know, my goal with this is the hope that when you start to feel reactive or defensive or triggered and you do this process, what that does is it helps to develop the wise part of us, which is also the observer mind. And that's where our power lies, because that's when we can stop, pause, and ask, how do I want to do things differently? What do I want to do? How do I want to respond versus just reacting? And so if you only take that away, I will feel like today is a victory.
You feel that way, Shannon Judge?
Absolutely. Yeah, I
Nice.
think that's a great note to tie it together.
Yeah, and I want to just share some of the synergy of you attending today. If you've done a pattern map, or if you haven't, if you've done one today with us or done them in the past, this will bring your awareness back to that. I remember the first time Nicole gave me a pattern map and I was like, oh man, she's calling me on my own BS right here, right now, just what I needed. And that's Nicole's way of lovingly helping you see how you're getting in your own way. Once you have that awareness, you can't go back to that level. You can not hold yourself as accountable to it. You won't go back that same neural network path, which Nicole just said. And Shannon mentioned that. The other thing is if you didn't do a pattern map, you can go back and listen to this again and then get absorbed in looking at your own triggers or your own places where you get tripped up and start to see how you can help yourself, not doubt, but instead have confidence. Instead of pulling yourself off purpose and thinking that you have to compromise, you can stay on purpose. Because in reinvention, we're looking to build your confidence, that when you reinvent, you now can connect to purpose. And at the end of the day, no matter what you decide you're going to do with your career or the part of your life that you're reinventing, you have more fulfillment and contentment. That's what we're looking for. And this pattern mapping is one way for you to help hone in on that. It's just one tool of many. So any last things you want to say, Nicole or Shannon, before I invite the audience to?
I have one thought that I believe is key. It's like once it makes it less about the other person, I think, when we dive into this, which is huge because I think that's enormous. And also one thing that I've experienced, and I'm sure people on this call have experienced, like when we start to shift this stuff and look at it and heal it within ourselves, it's amazing that we show up differently. And oftentimes the other person shows up differently, even though they haven't changed.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes, and anybody who's studied the drama triangle, once you shift to the empowerment triangle and you become the coach and the creative and the challenger, instead of the victim, the hero, or the persecutor, you forever know that you're in charge of your life again.
Yeah.
Yeah. Nicole, did you want to say anything before we end today?
It's always an honor to be in this space with you guys. I feel complete for today. I think it was beautiful. Shannon, thank you.
Thank you for guiding through that and
A
all
lot
your
of-
support.
A lot of vulnerability, a lot of honesty.
Yeah.
And really, you know, the thing that I'm learning over and over again is the theme that when we're more honest, when we're more true, when we're being true, goes back to the SoulSalt. Very first thing we do in chapter 3 in the book, or our very first course, Be True, that's online. When you know your truth and you live it, everything works out, even in reinvention. You can get through the hard things. There will be inconvenience. There will be things that you feel discomfort over. You will get through them, though. You can do the hard things. So thank you for being with us today. We hope we've lightened the load. If you want to leave when you leave, you want to leave us with a sentence of where you got value, we'd love to see that. And otherwise, Shannon D, come on and tell us when is the next one and what's the next topic.
Next topic is the inevitable ambiguity of reinvention. And we are looking at September 4th at noon Mountain Time. So it's always the first Wednesday of every month at noon Mountain Time.
Okay, thank you so much. Take care, everyone.